The Atheist Debates Patreon Project presents a debate review versus Muslim apologist Daniel Haqiqatjou, Part 1. Yeah, Part 1. And this one isn't going to be what most people are waiting for, because this was a debate that was 3 hours long in 3 different segments, and there will be at least 3 debate reviews. There may be 4. This one is going to be an overview of before the debate, one thing that happened during the debate, or maybe 2, and then after the debate. So this is sort of the overview summary. And then what will come afterwards is I will take each of the 3 one-hour segments that we had debates and discussions in and review them either as 3 individual reviews so that we can get there, because there's a lot in each one of them. These were packed hours. Hour number 2 is the weak one that is irrelevant, where there wasn't much contention, and so either I might skip that or just include it with one of the 2 other ones. This debate was agreed to when I was in Dallas, I think just after DebateCon 3. And he had debated, I guess, Aaron at that event. And James had asked me, hey, would you be willing to debate him at the next DebateCon? And I'm like, yeah, sure. I didn't know anything about him really, other than what I'd seen. It seemed kind of bizarre. He seems to have these notions about atheists wanting to live in pods and have sex and take drugs. And I'm generally okay with that. But, it seems to be his big fear. But then after that, there was a debate that I went to where I debated another Muslim. And Daniel debated Mike Jones, known as Inspiring Philosophy Online, a Christian apologist whom I've also debated. And that debate was about child marriage. And Daniel sat there and not only defended child marriage, but scoffed and mocked at anything modern, Western, liberal, progressive, any ideas like that might involve, I don't know, a reasonable age of consent. When that was over, and I knew that I was going to have to debate this guy after he sat there and essentially advocated for child marriage and child rape, I really wanted to just get out of the debate. But I decided that I'm going to stick to my word and do what I said I'd do, but with a slightly different goal. And so the first thing that I wanted to do was make sure this debate was about competing ideologies, that this debate was about secular humanism versus Islam and which one is actually better for the world. And the key thing that I was going to do, and I even announced that I was going to do it here, my apologies, it never happened. You'll find out why in just a second. The first thing that I was going to do was to post my entire opening statement online months ahead of the debate, and that it was going to focus almost exclusively on the idea of individual autonomy and one subject that was noticeably missing from his last debate: consent. While Mike did a fine job addressing the issue, neither Mike nor Daniel addressed the issue of consent. And Daniel does not have anything that comes close to a proper understanding of consent, as we saw in this debate as well. He doesn't understand that consent, which I will do another video on, is the result of an informed, educated position that you then assent to. And this requires a minimum of maturity and understanding. Children cannot consent. Children's consent to, you could get a child to consent to all kinds of things, and it would be just as manipulative as if you did it with someone of a mental defect or someone that you conned someone into. That's not what consent is. Getting someone to say yes is assent. Getting someone to consent requires them having the cognitive ability to process that. 4-year-olds can't consent to marriage, Daniel, and neither can a 9-year-old. But I didn't do that video because we couldn't agree on that debate topic. As a matter of fact, the topics of this debate changed several times. At first, I was contacted and I was told that he wanted the debate to be in 3 parts, one on epistemology, one on morality, and one on comparative religion. And when I pushed back on this first 3-pronged thing and said, look, we could do one, we could essentially do a debate about epistemology. We could do a debate about morality. We could do a debate comparing secular humanism to Islam. I want the 3rd one. Why don't we just skip the first 2? We can have discussions about epistemology and morality as part of this. But I don't see the need to divide this up into 3 little segments. What I got back was, here's 3 new topics, which were very, very similar, but a little bit different. So it was clear right then that he had a plan that he was not going to let go of. And the next one was, part 1 was supposed to be, is there good evidence of God? And part 2 was, is there evidence for Islam over other religions? And part 3 was Islam and ethics, which is best for society, secular humanism or Islam? And at this point, I was like, fine, if that's what he wants to do, we'll do it, and I'll come up with a plan. And this knocks down my plan entirely. But I had already agreed to do the debate, and I just wanted to get in and get it over with and do the best I could. So I began planning for that new format. Shortly after that, he changed those 3, or he changed one of those 3. Number 2 and number 3 stayed the same, but number 1 changed from, is there good evidence of a God, to, is there evidence of a God? This is the part where Daniel evidently decided that, or realized, he doesn't have good evidence for God under good evidential standards, and he's going to rely on intuition and try to claim that intuition, while it might be wrong, is good enough. And so instead of defending, is there good evidence of God, he specifically changed it to, is there evidence of a God? Then the debate topics changed once more, with, is there evidence of a God? And then the second one changed from, is there evidence for Islam over other religions, to, is there any religion more compelling than Islam? So we went from, is there good evidence of a God, to, is there evidence of a God? We weakened the first debate proposal right off the bat. When we get into this, you'll see that not only did he not present any good evidence for a God, he didn't present any evidence for a God, and just said that you can intuit a God. The second one went from morality to, is there evidence for Islam over other religions, to, is there any religion more compelling than Islam? And this phrasing was bizarre, which is, I pointed it out during my opening. This was the weakest, most useless part of the debate, which is why there wasn't a lot of contention, because it doesn't matter how compelling something is. What matters is whether or not it's true. How are you going to judge compelling? Is it by how popular the idea is, how many adherents it has? If so, then Islam loses. If you're going to do it with, is it more about the religion compelling you to do something, then Islam might win. But that's domineering control. That's like saying the most fascist dictator is the most compelling one because he compels you to do, or compels more actual facets of your life. But by that point, I just knew we needed to get this debate locked in. And so I accepted his 3, is there evidence of a God? Is there any religion more compelling than a God? And Islam and ethics, which is best for society, secular humanism, or Islam. When I took these, I took them with very specific ideas and plans in mind. And that's what I'm going to talk about for a few minutes right here. On the subject of, is there good evidence of a God? Here's my thinking. I need to talk about what qualifies as evidence and how that can be consistent with various God concepts. What qualifies as good evidence? What qualifies as evidence for a proposition or evidence consistent with a proposition? And which is just merely facts that might relate to something. So I structured my opening for part 1 entirely around teaching the difference between a fact, like a dead body, is not evidence that I killed it. It's not evidence that anyone killed it. It could have just been a heart attack or an act of God, because that amuses me. But the body is certainly consistent with someone killing it if there are other facts that point to that. And that's why merely pointing to a body isn't evidence of a murder. Pointing to the trees or the universe isn't evidence of God. That was part one. I also decided that I was going to hold him to the topics that he stated and was not going to let him deflect into other topics at all. And that while I was going to be directing the majority of my comments and responses to the crowd, prior to the debate, I didn't really look at him or talk to him. There was one moment while we were fixing microphones where I talked about him. But generally, he's a vile, disgusting individual who is not an honest interlocutor and is in this for clicks and attention. And you can watch it as he loses the crowd and they start to get mad because he's up there defending sex with 9-year-olds. He smiles. He smiles. That first part of the debate, which we'll go into detail of what was said on both parts in another video, right off the bat, after the openings, he started saying something, and I interrupted, and he called me out on it. And that's when I made my second decision of this debate. Okay, that's fair. If you're talking and somebody interrupts you, it is fair to call them out. I should be called out. People who do it to me should be called out. But it was also one of those things where when you're having a heated exchange, everybody's going to interrupt everybody at some point. And the fact that he did it with such quickness to call me out for interrupting just meant that I put a little note in my mind. I didn't actually write it down, which was call him out every time he interrupts you. Call him out. He wants to play that game. He wants to try and get a point that way. Let's see who gets the most points. And I did for quite a while. I repeatedly called him out every time he interrupted because he can't help it. He can't help it. The third subject of the debate was the one that I was actually most interested in because that's where I get to defend secular humanism. The second one was, as I mentioned, was about whether or not it's compelling, which is just kind of a pointless way to phrase any of this. So my plan was defend secular humanism, hold him to defend exactly what he said. And if you watch the first hour of the debate, that's exactly what I did. I want to give the best destruction of his case that I can possibly give. And I want to give the best secular humanist defense possible. And I want to let him get away with nothing. I'm going to call a spade a spade. I'm going to use blunt language. I am not going to let him bully or threaten, which I've watched him do repeatedly. As a matter of fact, if you go back and you watch those debates from that day, both Jake, the meta-Muslim math, whatever, both Jake and Daniel were telling audience members, sit down, take your seat, sit down. This gets to the heart of the problem that I'll address in just a minute about control being a factor in the type of dudes, and these are dudes, who wind up falling into this particular brand of Islam. So we'll do the 3 hours in other videos, but I want to get to this stuff. And here's where I laid a trap. I prepared my 3 openings for each of the 3 hours, and I prepared them such that if I were to have to go first, they would preemptively demolish anything that he was going to say to any reasonable person out there. But it wasn't clear, with these being phrased as questions, is there evidence of God? Is there any religion more compelling than Islam? Which is better for society? With the questions phrased the way they were, it wasn't clear who should necessarily have the affirmative and go first. And I wanted to go first on all 3 of them. But I allowed Daniel to make every decision because he'd already decided on the topics, decided on the format. He got the 3 hours he wanted. He's doing this all to get little clicks and sound bites, which is why nobody's bothered to offer anything but name calling and sound bites from the other side since the debate was over. And I was like, hey, James, who should we go first? And Daniel, predictably, did the, well, if Matt can go first on some of these if we want. And I was like, I'm happy to do a coin toss. I'm happy to go first if that's what you want, but I'm happy to do a coin toss. Maybe we alternate, I go first on one, you go first on one, and then we flip a coin for the other one. All of those were offered up to James. And then when Daniel did what I absolutely predicted he would do, which was to say, if Matt wants to go first, he can go first, then I went first. Because he thinks now that because he's made all the other decisions in this debate, that this is one where he's giving it to me. And yet I absolutely predicted it. There's another thing that I predicted, which James can vouch for, because James stopped by our place in Austin earlier in the week. And one of the things we talked about was the upcoming debate. And he had asked kind of what we were expecting. And I said, I absolutely expect him to go after my partner, who won't even be there. She'll be off working somewhere else. She won't even be there, but he'll absolutely go after my partner, because I included a line in my opening statement that I'm pretty sure I did not say. I think at the last minute I changed my mind. And that line went roughly like this. That's all I have to say on evidence for God as my opening. Now let's see if the opponent actually presents evidence for a God or not. Because what happens frequently in these is instead of addressing my positions or my arguments, they address me personally. So go ahead, keep score at how many personal statements about me Daniel tries, and about my life in general, because nothing about me or my life is relevant to whether or not he has evidence for God. And every time he brings it up, he's admitting that he doesn't have evidence for God. I removed that line because I was worried that if I stated it, it might make him less likely to actually bring up those irrelevant facts. But we absolutely predicted it. It's still in my notes from before then, saved with the date prior to that. And he absolutely did it. So I won on the who goes first. That was an absolutely planned moment. And the substance of the debate was wild. But there's one incident that occurred in the debate that I want to talk about, and then I'll talk about what happened after the debate. And that is when I got up and got in Daniel's face, because that is how people are portraying. Some people are portraying it as if I was an aggressor who got up out of my chair and got in Daniel's face. And the reality, if you go back and watch it, is that Daniel was sitting there talking over me, yelling over me, claiming that I didn't have an answer to his question. But I did have an answer to his question, and I told him that if he would shut the fuck up, I would do it. And then Daniel said, come over here and say that. Now, if you remember back at the beginning when I said that I was not going to let him get away with anything and I was not going to allow him to bully me, when you say come over here and say that, that's not I'm hard of hearing. Could you state that again? Or I missed part of that. Could you repeat yourself? That is an aggressive threat. It is an accusation. You're a coward. And if you had to say that where you were within physical reach of me, you would not dare say that. That was Daniel exercising his absolutely disgusting machismo to try to show off how tough he is, that I'm the coward who won't say that to his face. And so what did I do? I stood up and I walked towards him and I said, where would you like me to stand? I'm not violent at all, but I will stand wherever you want and tell you to your face that I have an explanation. And if you shut the fuck up, I will give you that explanation. I'm not worried about the people who think that I was being the aggressor there. They're either dishonest or confused. We all know what it means when somebody's like, come over here and say that. It's like when you're in a bar and somebody's like, you want to take this outside? They're not asking you to go outside and have a cigarette and talk. They're prompting a fight. And the truth of the matter is that Daniel is the coward. Daniel did not think that I would get up and stand up and walk over to him. And I did. And that's what you have to do when somebody is being a bully. He's bullied repeatedly. He's yelled at audience members to sit down, mocked them, called them names. He loves it when the audience gets after him. He sits there and he smiles. He has zero respect for anybody. He doesn't respect women. He doesn't respect children. He doesn't respect the seculars. He despises everything about everybody while he sits comfortably in the United States, pretending that he wishes he lived in a Muslim-controlled country when he would have no job, nothing of interest, and nobody paying any attention to him in such a country. He is poisoned with toxic masculinity and machismo, and he has a bunch of fanboys, a bunch of them. I know because I've had to block a dozen or more. They keep coming after me after this debate's over. And you know what? Not one of them has said, here's where Matt was factually wrong, and then demonstrated it. Not one of them has said, hey, here's a fallacy in Matt's reasoning. Not one of them said, you're wrong, Matt. Daniel actually did present good evidence of God. Here's what it was. None of that happens. They can't, because these aren't debates. They can't because their champion did not present evidence of God, did not defend Islam as being more compelling, just that it might be, which has nothing to do with whether or not it's true, and did not demonstrate that Islam is better for the world than secular humanism. He's upset because he also doesn't understand consent, just like all of his little fanboys who decided, let's see, what did they say about me? Oh, yes, I'm weak. I have no honor. I'm a cuck. I'm a beta. They misgender my partner. They called me gay. Daniel called me gay during the debate. They talk about the fact that I was in an open marriage, and so I can't, I let my wife have sex with other men. They don't understand consent. What they want is control. There's a reason that Islam appeals to the Andrew Tate sex trafficking mindset types of the world. There's a reason that Islam appears to the E.A. Dawa child molesting groups. There's a reason that Islam appears to the Kenny Bomers who threaten to take off their belt and beat someone with it, or at least that's what that video appears to show. There's a reason that Islam appeals to broken masculinity, to bad machismo. There's nothing wrong with being masculine. There's nothing wrong with being manly. There's nothing wrong with any of those things. What's wrong is the toxic masculinity that has to view this as a zero-sum game where you are the person in power and control and the women are your things. They still don't understand consent. They don't understand that a 9-year-old can't give consent, as I mentioned at the beginning, because that's not what it's about. Kids can't consent to either school or sex. So Daniel, who thinks that secular humanists are hedonists wanting to allow any and all pleasure, is mad because I want to forcibly require kids to go to school, and he wants to forcibly require them to marry some dirty old man. I want 9-year-olds to get educated, and he wants 9-year-olds to get married. But somehow I'm the bad guy. Daniel's fanboys are misogynistic little boys who think they're men. They have no power or control. They're following a religion and a champion, an apologist, who gives them the illusion of power and control. It's like the people who are saying, oh, that's my sports team. We're the best. You're not on that sports team. You're not a member of the Dallas Cowboys. You're not a member of the Chicago Bulls. You're just somebody sitting there watching them. When you say, oh, there's the Chicago Bulls, aren't we great? No, we're not great. They're great. You didn't do anything. Oh, I'm one of the fans. The fans are the supporters. Yeah. Keep telling yourself that. It's an incredibly weak illusion. because the only thing that they can actually dominate are women who've been forced to buy into this ideology, and the suck-up beta men who are sitting there applauding Daniel at everything he does, and the children that they want to force into marriage. That isn't power and control worth wanting, and yet this is what Islam and toxic masculinity combined have told them is the power and control they should be engaged in. It's not power and control. It's weakness, and it's easy to spot. It's the same weakness that Muhammad had when he married a 6-year-old and consummated it in 9. It's the same weakness that Daniel had until some disenfranchised fanboys decided to create a circle jerk of applause for him. They haven't presented any arguments. They haven't presented any evidence. They haven't done anything to justify Islam. They haven't done anything to show that they have any sort of mentality or idea that is good for society. Daniel won't be respected by anyone but the weak-minded, immoral, broken little boys that follow him. Now, there's 3 more parts to this debate, probably, where I'll go through and review the substance of those sections. There may only be 2, because the middle part was almost as weak as all the little fanboys that are applauding Daniel. I watched a really good video the other day about the sort of men going their own way, red pill, MAGA, Andrew Tate, blah, blah, blah. Men aren't okay, but they could be. We could do a much better job, and secular humanism would do a much better job of breaking the surrounding toxic masculinity and teaching men and boys that you can be awesome while still being respectful. You can support equality between various genders while still maintaining respect, dignity. That you can have power and control that are not irresponsible and do not come at the cost of other people. You go back and watch those debates. We'll do the full reviews of the substance soon, but you go back and watch those debates from that day. And it was the Muslim apologists who were advocating for child marriage, child rape. It was the Muslim apologists who were trying to pretend that everything liberal in West counts as secular humanism when it doesn't. He had to reach back into time, centuries before secular humanism was even offered up as an idea, to try to claim other things. He tried to claim that Presidents Bush, both of them, were somehow secret advocates of secular humanism. This bizarre fantasy world that Daniel and others have created centers on a completely broken idea of masculinity combined with the most vile aspects of Islam. Putting those together puts everyone at risk to weak-minded, weak-willed, weak-ass little babies who should not be leading anything, let alone the world. So there's my name-calling return. I'll come over and say it to your face if you want. But the debate reviews are coming up next. Bye-bye.